Hey everyone, DJ here. And today we are going to be doing some hair shading in the LuxCore engine. You'll be able to take this scene that we created in a previous tutorial and be able to convert it over to LuxCore very simply using a couple shaders and a couple techniques that I'm going to show you. If you haven't, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And we are also on Discord, and I do have a Patreon up. So if you'd like to become a patron, please check that out. You can see the links below in the video description. And let's go ahead and jump into Blender here. So what I have here is a scene. I'm just going to move this over real quick. I have this scene that we created in a previous tutorial where I showed you how to create a hair emission and how to shade it in the Cycles engine. Now, the main thing here is that the way that LuxCore works is quite a bit different, and it can be very frustrating for a lot of people. And it's one of those things that, like, each engine has its own different way of doing things. And I find that Cycles is really, really easy and very user friendly when it comes to shading hair, especially with the principled hair BSDF that we covered in the previous tutorial. But for those of you who want to use LuxCore to create something like rugs or other sorts of items that you need a hair shader for, this should work just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you how I'm setting up the scene here. So first of all, what we're going to do is we have to change the render engine here over to LuxCore. Now, for those of you who have an AMD GPU or a non-NVIDIA GPU, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, you're going to need to use the CPU rendering for this because GPU rendering, as far as I know, as of right now, has some problems with color ramps and normal maps and some stuff like that. So I'm just letting you know ahead of time that you might run into some crashing issues if you're using an AMD GPU and you're using for your final render or for your viewport render if you're using GPU, you might run into some issues. But CPU should work just fine. And if you have an NVIDIA GPU, which I currently now have, you should have no issues. So I'm going to go ahead and change I'm not going to worry about the device here right now because that's really for the final output. But if you go down here to viewport render, we're going to turn off the denoiser because that saves the CPU some energy. And then we're going to change the device right here to GPU. So again, keep it on CPU if you do not have an NVIDIA GPU. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you what the shading looks like and what the materials look like for a PBR texture. This is covered in another previous tutorial, so you can go ahead and check that out. I'll put up a card right now. But basically, it's a 2D map node here, which you can easily create when you create your image maps. You can just click this little add button here. And I have that tiled over 5 times, and I'm using a texture from texturehaven.com. So you can grab that if you'd like. It's the concrete floor painted. You can do a search on the website for that. And I've just plugged it into a Disney material node, and it's a very, very basic sort of material. I'm going to hit the / key on the numpad, and I'll just hit this to rendered so you can check it out. So this is what the material looks like right now. And you'll notice that the background has sort of this procedural sky texture. And since I'm importing this from a Cycles session, it's very simple to do HDRIs. So if you go here to the world settings, let me just close this really quick. And I will go to solid mode here just to save on the rendering. If you see right here where it says world light, you can go to HDRI and import your image. And I get my images from HDRIHaven.com, so you can check that out. The link is below in the video description. If you go here and you click on use cycle settings, it actually pulls in your previous cycle settings. So if you already have a previous one, you're just kind of converting over to LuxCore. It's a really easy way to get that HDRI put back in, just like that. Okay. So now let's take a look at our actual object here. So I'm going to go into the isolated mode here of this particular engine or this particular object here. And we'll do that by hitting / on the numpad, which puts us in local view, and it sort of isolates that by itself. And right now there's really no materials because I haven't done the materials for the metal here. And this is a very basic conversion. We're not going to be using the cycles nodes here. I'm just going to go up here, change this to LuxCore materials, and I'm going to click on the shiny metal here, and I'm going to click right here where it says metal, and we're going to add the Fresnel keep it aluminum because it's probably some kind of aluminum for the handle here. And since this is the shiny one here, and I want some anisotropic here, I'm just going to have this set to like a 0.05 is probably fine, and then set this to a 0.01 or something like that, just for now. Then I'm going to go to the rough metal, and I'm going to go down here to metal, click on that button, click Fresnel, and then I will click anisotropic, and then I'll just get a little bit more, so I'll put like a 0.15, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and save my file here, so File, Save As, and we're going to call this Shaving Brush for Lux Tutorial, and I'll call it V1, okay? And let's take a look at how that is shaping up. So we have a shiny material on the top and a more rough material on the bottom, and that'll do just fine for this tutorial. Now, you can see here, this is the hair emission, and it just looks like some kind of ghosty, wispy, lines, and you can see right through it and stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and start on the hair now. After we've converted everything else, we're going to go ahead and start shading the hair. Now, again, I just want to reiterate, this is a lot more, it's not more complex, but it's not as easy, I should say, as cycles with the principled hair. And in my opinion, it doesn't really look as good either. There is a really good tutorial out there by Dravia Studio where he actually goes through how to create this sort of like character hair, and he shows you some more details and stuff. I'm not going to cover the same stuff that he does necessarily because why do that when somebody else has already done it? So go ahead and check out that. I'm going to put a link to this video in the video description as well, so you can check that out. I'm going to go ahead and go back to Blender here. And we're going to basically look at this and kind of do like a practical shading of this hair. So to begin with, what we need to do, and I'm going to pull this over here, you need to go over to your material or particle properties, okay? And if we go down the list, there is a new setting that you can, if you look down the list, you can find it. It's called LuxCore Hair Settings. So if we open that up, this is basically where a lot of the information is going to be needed to be input for our hair shading here. And first, what we're going to start with is the coloring of the actual hair. That's the first thing that we're going to tackle. And for those of you who have some lower powered computers and stuff like that, you might want to go into the children setting and click on none for now and just, shade it and color it according to this so that you don't have as much of a lag in seeing the changes. But for you all, and because my computer can handle it, I'm going to keep all the children on right now so you guys can see what it actually looks like. So let's go down the list here again to the LuxCore hair settings, and right here where it says Vertex colors, this is where you can actually do sort of like the intercept node for, if I go over to the shader, the regular shader editor here, how we used the intercept before from the hair info node, and then we pipe that into a color ramp. This kind of does the same thing. It's not as accurate and it's not as good, I think, uh, as cycles, but it's what it is. So it starts off just with white, and that's just a plain color. What we want to do here is we want to actually change this to the from emitter vertex colors. And what this is going to do is we're going to add some colors here. So the root we're just going to make black, and we're actually going to pipe this through something. So we're going to make the root black, the tip is going to be white, and then we're going to click this right here that says add vertex color. Okay, and it says right here COL, vertex color COL. So what we want to do now is we want to go over to the material properties tab. We're going to click on use LuxCore material nodes, and it's going to kind of like pull up this matte material. And if you're kind of doing this fresh and you have some other sort of hair emitter that's not from this tutorial, you can actually go and when you add a new material, you can go to the node tree presets and click on, for you guys, just do the matte right now, and we're going to add some different stuff, but that's for fresh people who have their own emitters and they didn't do the previous tutorial, so that'll work for you. So inside here, we're just going to take a look at this matte material, and if we go into the rendered view here, we're not really going to see a whole lot. It's just some sort of basic material, And maybe for some of you, that's just completely fine. Obviously, for me, we want to do some kind of realism. So we're going to make quite a bit of changes here. So what we're going to do first here is we're going to add, and you can do a search here for Vertex. We're going to bring up Vertex Color, okay? So Vertex Color is basically a node where we can select that color that we created inside of the LuxCore hair settings right down here, okay? And we're going to take that and we're going to add a color ramp. So utilities, color ramp, right there, all right? I'm going to take the color, pipe it into the amount right here, and we're just going to take that and put it into the diffuse color. And you can see right there we have kind of what we saw before, where you have the intercept of the hair, where the root or the bottom is black and the tip is white, and you can see that reflected right here. And you can take the offset right here and you can drag it over and you can see that it's changing the hair color. And you can see here that it's not as good as the other one because intercept in cycles will actually take into account the actual length of each individual hair instead of just the overall length of the hair, as far as I can tell from how I've been using it before. I could be wrong, but it seems to be a little bit more accurate in doing some of the length here, but this should work out just fine. So we're going to take this and we're going to keep it just plugged into that matte material there. And we're going to mess with some other settings. So you may have noticed that it's a lot more thin and wispy than we had it set before. And if this is a new particle emitter for you and you're not using this particular scene, what you need to do is you need to go over here in the LuxCore settings to thickness, and we're going to change this, all right? And what we're going to do is we're going to change this to a point 0, let's see, 0.75. Let's try that because we want more of like a thicker hair here. And you can see there, now it's much thicker and it's sort of like easier to tell where the individual strands are. The other thing that you really need to pay attention to when it comes to this is that, and this is just some trial and error and some things I discovered while I was working on this, the tessellation type right over here is going to change a lot on how this is being rendered. And the best setting that I've seen so far, as far as trying to get it realistic right from the get-go, from when you're looking at it really close up, is to go to the solid, not the adaptive solid, but the solid view here, or the solid tessellation. And if we go back here to rendered, you can see that now it's more of what you can expect to see from the preview, where you see all these twists and turns and everything. If I change this back to the adaptive triangle ribbon, which is the default, you can see that it's a lot kind of thicker and not as nice looking. It's like a lot more straight or something. And if we change it to the regular triangle ribbon, let's take a look at that. You can see that it does follow a lot better the twists and turns, but for me, it just doesn't look as good. It's not quite as realistic. So I'm going to change it back to solid and I'm going to go back to rendered, and there we go. So it's a little bit better looking, a little bit more geometry, so it's going to take longer to render and everything like that. But this, I think, is the best setting for getting more realistic hair in something like this. And you can change these things here. You can cap the root and cap the top if you want. Really, it doesn't matter at this point because everything is so small that we can't really see that, and we'll save the geometry by keeping these checked off. You can also change the number of sides from 3 to 4, whatever you'd like to do. That's really up to you on how you want to handle that because you know, there's already a lot of these being emitted right now. And since the actual render is going to be probably from something like this far away, we're probably not really going to see that detail in the number of sides there. But like I say, it's really up to you on your particular situation. Maybe you're doing a close up for some sort of medical thing where you see hair follicles or something, so you might need that. The next thing that we're going to look at here is the root and the tip length. So basically this just makes a straight line in thickness from the root to the tip, so it's all the same thickness. And if you change the tip down to a 0, that'll change it, but you need to refresh your previewer here. So I'm going to go back from rendered to solid and then back to rendered view. And you can see that now the tips are really wispy and short. The other thing here is that you have this offset, so if you switch this, it'll change the root thickness. it says right here, offset from root for thickness variation. So if we take this and we, make this 75% or something, and take a look at that, you can see that it basically stays thicker throughout, and then it will sort of like change the way that the thickness is being calculated from the root to the tip. So we're going to set this offset to like a 50, and I'm going to put the tip here to a 50. Actually, let's just take the offset and move it all the way down. So we'll have a nice change from the root to the top, but we're not going to have as thin as the 0%. So there's that. And what you'll want to do, let's say that this was exactly the kind of material you wanted, which isn't going to be the end of the tutorial here. We have a lot more to do. You might want to double check your render settings. And I'm just going to show you to set this now so we can actually see the proper render. So if you go here to the render setting, when you're inside of the particle properties, you'll see that there's this thing right here called path. Okay. And in my opinion, what makes this look really nice, click this B-spline here. It does seem like it shortens it a little bit, but it does make um, it will make this look a lot more realistic here. So I would change this to a B-spline. Make sure to set the steps to the same amount as your previewer. So if we go to the viewport display, you can see the strand steps is 4. Make sure that in your render setting over here, the steps is set to the same so that you get a proper result when you render. Okay. So then when we take a look at this, here's where we're at right now. So now that we have the overall shape and the way that these strands are sort of going to be rendered out in the final, we can start to add some other materials here. So this is just a regular matte material. And, for some people this might work out for you, but we're going to do something different. We are going to add a material, and I'm going to show you this split up, and then we're going to put it together into one node, okay? So we're going to first start with a matte translucent, okay? Because hair has light that passes through it, and we want to be able to reflect that in the actual way that we shade this thing. So we're going to take the color ramp now, and we're going to throw it into the reflection color, and take that material and pipe it into the material output. And at this point, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and set some new colors here so that we can actually get some more realistic coloring than just this white here. So I'm going to take the black, and we're going to make this more of, let's try a brownish color, something like that. And then the top, we will change this to, let's see here, I'm just going to pull this up a bit. So let's make this something like that. So it's a little bit darker at the bottom, and I'll pull this offset back down. And then this one here, let's try something like this lighter color here. You'll notice, and this is one of those things that I had to sort of discover and play with as I was using this. You'll start to see these reflections and stuff like that, and it doesn't really seem quite realistic at this point, but that's okay. We're going to change a couple of the things, and it's going to make this look really nice. So next thing that we need to sort of deal with here is this transmission color. And this is basically the light that's passing through. This is the coloring that that gets. So if you change this to an orange or a red, you can change the overall color this way. And you can see that that's where, some of the light is passing. So you get that. So that's basically what that does. And you can take your color ramp here or another color ramp and pipe it in to get the same sort of transmission color going on as your reflection color. I've found that it doesn't really look quite that great, so what I usually do is pick a solid color to sort of give it some sort of like commonality throughout the whole shading of the hair here. So maybe something like that. So once you have this translucent material here, you can add material, and that's Shift A to add, and then go down to right here where it says glossy coating, okay? And then we're going to pop that in right here. So basically what this does is it's going to add a gloss over the top, kind of like adding a, shininess to it. And if you take the material here, put it into the base material, um, that's going to give you some of this shine that we're starting to see get rendered here. And what we'll want to do is we'll want to check on multi-bounce because that'll just give it a little bit more realism because the light will pass around quite a bit more inside of the hair follicles. And we want to use IOR because all of these little strands, you don't have to, but I think it looks better if you use IOR. All these little strands should have their own sort of like little bit of shininess and stuff like that, and it should be based on the actual geometry of these. So if you use the IOR there, it's going to add, I think, a little bit more realism to how the roughness is being calculated. And you can change the roughness or the shininess right here. So if you increase it, that means it's going to be more rough, and you're going to see more white get sort of like cast around throughout this object. And if you pull it all the way over to the left, it's more shiny, and you should start to see more of that shine. It should be like little smaller follicles or little smaller highlights throughout the object. So I'm going to take this, I'm just going to pop it up a little bit more just to show you a little bit more of what's going on. And I'm going to take the transmission color actually, I'm going to pull this up. Something like that. Now what I'm going to also do here is I'm going to show you what happens when you have sort of darker colors. So if I take this, I'm going to pop this in here, take this, and I'm going to make this a darker color. So you can see here that when the transmission color is set up kind of high, as far as the black and white value, it sort of takes over the overall coloring. And you can control this by moving this up and down. So if you have darker hair that should have less light passing through, like, some sort of darker brown or black hair or something like that, you'll want to change the transmission color to a darker color. And that's going to get you more of like this, more dark sort of like, if this was some other kind of paintbrush or something like that that had a different set of coloring that was darker and all that, you'd want to help out your shading by taking your transmission color and pulling that down. And if you go up more, you can control the brightness or the light that's passing through by using that. And it's, I think, one of the best ways to shade is by using this transmission color and, playing with the roughness, getting that where you want, and making sure your transmission color is accurate. I'm just going to pop this back in here, and we're going to look at a couple other things. Now, one more really cool way to get this sort of the way that you want is to use the absorption color here. And if you just take this color and you pop it up to a white and you start moving around here, you're going to notice that nothing is really happening as far as the rendering. And that's because you need to actually set an absorption depth in order for this to actually do anything. So if we set the absorption to a 1, for example, you can see that now the whole thing has become blue. And you might be confused because this is an orange, but this is a blue. Kind of think of this as opposites. So if you take the absorption color here and you can see that it's on orange, what we're seeing is blue. So it's absorbing that color, and so this is being seen more. And that's kind of how it works is by opposites. At least that's the easiest way I can sort of explain it and have it make sense without going into a lot more detail. And this is kind of the way that you can start to control some of the other scene coloring effects. So you can see now it's a really nice brown hair shading instead of the if we take this, sorry, the absorption here, take that down to 0, you can see that's really like blonde-ish or lighter brown, and there's really not a lot of variance as far as like when the hair is deeper, how it's being rendered. And if we take the absorption and we just kind of like pop that up maybe to a 2 or something, or even go higher, you can see that it starts to absorb it a lot more. So it's more of like a really, really dark black now. And if we change this to like a 0.25, it's less noticeable. So you can sort of play with that and get a different set of shading, or a different kind of shading the more you play with these. So it's sort of a mixture between whatever your base color is, which we use the Vertex coloring to make this. You can also use a solid color if you want, but I think using a Vertex color adds some realism to it because you can control the root and the tip colors. Then you take the transmission color and you change that to whatever makes sense to you, whatever kind of hair you want there to be, whatever kind of hair you want it to look like. And then the glossy coating here, you change this and add an absorption color to sort of like modify the overall color of the hair. And a mixture of all these things together will help render out a decent, realistic set of hair. Again, not as easy to sort of like put together and render as cycles with the principled hair BSDF, but you do get really nice results that look pretty pretty nice in a final render. So just to show you kind of a way that I created a another render with this object here, I added a third color, and the colors that I picked were like this. So I'm just kind of copy and pasting from another file here. So this was like a dark brown right in the center. So I set that sort of like where there's a variance right in the middle there. And then this one here was a lighter sort of tan, like this. And then the transmission color was something like this. And then for the absorption, I did this. And the IOR was a 1.55. And the absorption distance I put at a 0.471. And the roughness at a 0.15. So this was kind of the shading that I did for a test. Okay, so that's the kind of look that I'm getting there. So another thing that I'm going to show you here is all of this right here can be done with one node. And I'm going to delete this color ramp, and I'm just going to throw that in here. So if we go to material and you go down to glossy translucent, this basically puts together this and this into one node. If you're kind of newer to this and you want to see how everything works step by step, I do recommend using this technique. But this, if you're ready to use this, go ahead and do that. So basically color goes into the diffuse color right here. Take the material here and put that there. And we're going to go to the rendered view here so we can see it happening in real time, or rendering in real time. So we're just going to do the same things, the same settings as we did for both of these. Multi-bounce, use IOR, change the IOR to 1.55, copy and paste this hex value for the transmission color, just like that. And then for the absorption color, we're going to go here, grab this, paste, and 0.471. And for the roughness, 0.15. And that will give us the same coloring as we had before. So if I look at that, and then I take this and pop that into the material output, you can see that they're pretty much the same. So whichever way you choose to do your shading here, whether it's doing this separated technique or using this one shader, it's really up to you on how you want to handle that. Make sure that before you do your render, you come over here to the render settings. And if you don't want to use B-spline, you can check that off, but make sure that your steps are correct. Make sure that they are the same as your viewport display. Otherwise, you're going to get something different. If you want to add more steps, that's fine. You just might end up with more curls and stuff than you expected here if you added some children shapes and stuff like that, as far as the kink and the roughness and all that. So just make sure that you check your render setting to your viewport display. The next thing that you'll want to double check and make sure about is go into the LuxCore hair settings and make sure that your tessellation type is set to solid. I have found that this is the best way to get the predictable results that you see in the previewer, and it's the way that I think works the best and you get the best results. So definitely recommend doing that and set this up to whatever it is that you'd like it to be, and you should be able to hit F12 and render it out, and everything should work out fine. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. Hopefully you learned something and you no longer are frustrated with doing LuxCore hair shading. If you like this tutorial, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. That really helps me out, and I will see you guys next time on the next DJ Tutorials.